Now, Dutch voters head to the polls on Wednesday, the 15th of March. But how's the election shaping up in the run-up to election day? And what does this mean for Europe and, of course, the financial markets? Well, joining me to discuss just that is our senior market analyst, Jasper Lawler. Jasper, thank you very much for joining me. Now, first, I think we should apologise beforehand to the viewers out there about how our pronunciation will be for Dutch names going throughout this video.
They will be terrible, yeah.
We apologise in advance. Now, first, let's look at the latest polls. Now, in terms of political parties, we're still not seeing a clear winner. However, so a coalition of some sort is pretty much obvious. But how likely is it that it's going to include our right-wing Mr. Wilders' political party?
Well, that's the thing. That's the saving grace, I think, of this election, where the PVV party, so Geert Wilders' party, the far-right populist, nationalist party that markets could potentially be worried about, are leading in the polls and have been for a while. But the saving grace, as I said, is the fact that the Dutch system is proportional representation. So they're not going to have enough of the vote by themselves. They need to team up with some other parties. And most of the other leading parties have, well, all the leading parties and most of the minor parties have said they won't form a coalition with the PVV. So it almost seems like even if they win, they don't really win. So hence the kind of blasé reactions in markets that we've seen so far.
That's the thing, because it does leave us in a kind of weird situation, because as you said, leading parties, so the Christian Democratic Appeal, Democrats 66, the Socialist Party have all said, you know, if the Freedom Party come into power, we're not working with you. So what does that actually mean then come results day, when the actual results come out? How long could it actually take to form a government?
Well, what we're looking for in the polls to look to see if there is any kind of market volatility, any movements in the euro, for example, would be if the PVV start getting a percentage of the vote in and around 30%. That for us is a bit of a threshold whereby actually that could tempt, because they got quite a large lead over the other parties, that's when the other major parties could be tempted to go back on their word and join the PVV, or some of the smaller parties probably would need 6 or so of those smaller parties to gather together and just think, well, okay, we want to be in power, so we'll align ourselves with this nationalist party, which the country does seem to be behind if they have that kind of large percentage of the vote. If it's not that big, then I think the other parties will feel, you know, they haven't got a massive majority. It's not going against the ideas of democracy to just team up with one of the other parties.
Okay, you mentioned Euro. So beyond the Netherlands, how important is this week's election, especially as we know we've got the French and German elections coming up later this year? So what does it mean for the Euro area as a whole and markets?
Well, that's key, Rowena, because as we said, it seems unlikely that the PVV can actually form a government here. So the immediate risk of, say, the Dutch having an EU referendum, which they've called for, seems unlikely. Exiting Europe seems unlikely. But the implications, I think, are a bit wider, and that's maybe why we've actually seen French government bond yields spread out against their German counterparts a bit more than even the Dutch ones have, because it creates this sort of populist anti-immigration kind of idea across Europe, and that leads us into the French elections, where the French could take a bit of heart or take some lead from what happens in the Netherlands and go ahead and vote perhaps for Marine Le Pen in France. So, and France is a core country in Europe, whereas the Netherlands is a bit more of a peripheral country, maybe doesn't have quite the same impact on Europe's economy and not quite as integrated in terms of financial markets. So it's more what could happen to France and then later Germany is why this is important, rather than actually what happens to the Netherlands.
We are seeing quite a rise of populism here. I mean, we only have to look at Brexit, Donald Trump coming in. Actually, Wilders is described as the Dutch Donald Trump, which is quite interesting. I think maybe a little bit more than just his hairstyle.
Well, far be it for me to comment on someone with red hair, two people of. But I think you're right. I mean, the populism is on the rise, and that's why, I'm a bit more cautious on this than maybe the general market consensus. We look at the AEX, so it's traded as the Netherlands 25 on the LCG platform. That just hit the highest close since 2007. So obviously markets completely discounting this election. But as you said, populism generally is on the rise. I think it'd be a mistake to think that couldn't happen in the Netherlands and have some wider consequence.
So what could we see then post-election result for the AEX or Netherlands 25 as we trade it on LCG Trader and the euro and bond yields as you were talking about earlier?
Well, obviously also this week we've got the Fed announcement really on the same day as the voting for the Dutch election. The results are on Thursday, so that's, I guess, when the effect would be in the markets for the Dutch election, but also some lagging effect from the Fed as well. So that's why I think euro against the dollar is kind of muddled by the strength of the dollar, the expectations for a rate hike. So maybe the place to play it would be the euro against the yen or the pound. There's also central bank meetings from both Japan and the UK, which is also tricky. But I think that's where the weakness could come in. And the euro's been looking pretty strong against the pound recently, maybe unjustifiably so. And so this is one of those situations where it's a binary outcome. Either the PVV win or they don't. But the odds and the expectations are very skewed one way. So it's an asymmetric risk situation where the euro could get toppled if there is even a slight upset or a slightly bigger populist result, even if it doesn't result in a government being formed by Geert Wilders.
So Jasper, just to close, do you think a Dutch EU referendum is really going to take place? And let's just say voters were to vote today, what do you think the outcome would actually be?
I probably think today, if there was a vote, then the Dutch would tend to look at the economic consequences, and Netherlands is a bit more tied into Europe than Britain is, so I think a Nexit would be more costlier than a Brexit. But the reason to think it could happen is that immigration's a big issue. At the moment, we've seen diplomatic problems between Turkey and the Netherlands, a lot around the kind of immigration policies between the two. So, it's certainly a possibility, and at the moment it's not being countered by markets, but I think if there's any indication it would happen, it would be very much a euro negative, and I would say the AEX would be underperforming those other indices.
Okay, Jasper, thank you very much. So there's your Dutch election special. We'll be closely watching the Dutch election results, and of course, as Jasper has just said, we've got the Fed, Bank of Japan and Bank of England coming up all this week, so we'll be bringing you more on that. Goodbye for now.